identifying its strengths and weaknesses. Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Julia and you are listening to BBC Suffolk. Today's topic is on facial recognition and more precisely on a critical summary of the development of face recognition, its most known model and the most common bias identified within this framework. To start, I will be talking about a bit about the importance of facial recognition, followed by the specialized region of the brain responsible for facial recognition. Linking to this, some information on its development and evolution over time will be critically assessed. Next, the difference between object and face recognition will be briefly explained, focusing on a holistic approach. Furthermore, the well-known model constructed by Bruce and Young 1986 will be critically assessed. And last but not least, we will see that even though humans have well-developed face processing expertise, it still remains subject to many biases such as the cross-race effect, which will be touched upon. Face recognition is one of the most important factors when it comes to socialization for humans. Information can be gathered from a simple glance at one's face, and individuals can conclude one's identity, emotions, and their area of attention. Individuals can identify a face from hundreds of others, even though there are numerous variations in facial appearances, such as lighting, emotions, and hairstyles. The importance of facial identification is present in everyday life and can be highlighted by the difficulties encountered when these skills are compromised, such as those who have developed or were born with prosopagnosia. This is also supported by specialized processes. Typically, these are applied to faces and no other everyday objects, and is identified by specialist neural mechanisms such as the face selective regions of the cortex. These are known to be the most advanced regions in the brain for facial perception and are located on the fusiform gyrus, where responses are stronger to faces over any other form of stimuli. This area may receive basic perceptual representations of faces, and damage caused to this area can lead to the inability to recognize individual faces. Furthermore, some neurons located in the medial temporal lobe are reported to represent people at a general abstract level and respond selectively to faces. However, the superior temporal sulcus is sensitive to changes of the face and responses to emotional expression as well as eye gaze. Researchers have also identified that it takes the brain years to fully develop the specialized regions of the brain that are responsible for recognizing faces, although this is not entirely true, as we will soon see. Primarily, our face identification skills have been looked at as a result of vast experience during infancy, childhood, and adolescence, with adult similar abilities becoming present later on in development. This view was particularly dominant between the 1970s and the mid 1990s. It proposed that specialized mechanisms of facial perception were not even present until 10 years of age and that extended over a lifetime of experience. However, in the mid 1990s, a new block of evidence proposed that many aspects of face processing were present at younger ages, challenging the late maturity view. More than 25 years of research has now thoroughly tested adult face recognition and has concluded that each property of adult face recognition was present at the youngest of ages and even in infancy, which was previously missed out by earlier studies. This was known to be caused by methodological problems, of which the most common being floor effects in young children, research suggests. Thus, it is now argued that the face-specific perceptual mechanisms require 5 or so years at most to fully develop to the ability of an adult. So how does face recognition differ from the recognition of other objects? The answer relies on the fact that face recognition involves a more holistic approach. Face recognition challenges perception because similar facial features are arranged in similar configurations on all human faces. As such, subtle differences in facial features and their spatial relations are particularly useful for discriminating faces. To facilitate extraction of configural information, people process faces holistically, as evidenced by the fact that it is more difficult to ignore part of a face than part of an object. According to Rickler, Chung, and Gauthier 2011, holistic processing and face recognition have not been linked empirically. Evidence for the correlation between holistic processing and face recognition is mainly indirect, coming from studies on the inversion, part whole, and composite effects. The inversion effect concludes that it is more difficult to identify a face upside down compared to when it's upright, whereas with the part-whole effect, part of a face is easier to recognize with the whole face present rather than just on its own. In the composite effect, recognition of the faces is only hindered when two halves of different faces are aligned. All these components provide evidence that faces are subject to holistic processing according to scholars. Thus, the idea that holistic processing and facial recognition are now linked is refuted. We now turn to models of face recognition, of which most researchers have outlined the mass amount of differences of information we extract from faces. The model that outlined this best is by Bruce and Young, 1986, as it has been the most influential theoretical approach on face recognition, and most subsequent studies are based from their theory. The model has 8 components. The first one is structural encoding, which provides various representations or descriptions of faces. The second one is expression analysis, which describes other people's emotional states, which are inferred from their facial expression. The third one is facial speech analysis, meaning that speech perception is assisted by observing a speaker's lip movements. The fourth one is directed visual processing, and specific facial information is processed selectively. The fifth one is face recognition nodes, which contain structural information about known faces. The sixth one is person identity nodes, which provides information about individuals, for example, occupation or interest. The seventh one is name generation and refers to a person's name being stored separately. And the last one is cognitive system, which contains additional information such as most actors and actresses have attractive faces, and so it influences which other components receive attention. The model predicts that familiar and unfamiliar faces are processed in a different manner, that facial expression and facial identity are processed separately, and in the case of a familiar face, familiar information is looked at before identity or name. Many scholars, such as Malone et al. 1982, provided evidence for double dissociation between recognition of familiar and unfamiliar faces. Many others had come to the same assumption, explaining that there are different routes for processing facial identity and expression. For example, Fox et al. 2011 discovered that patients with damage to the face recognition network had impaired identity perception but not expression perception, and this can also lead to emotional impairments. This had concluded that different regions of the brain may have control over facial expressions and identity, with facial identity being associated with the fusiform face area, while processing expressions activating the superior temporal sulcus. Another study conducted by Young et al. 1985 noted that people decipher a lot quicker whether a face is familiar than the identity of that face. They found evidence that the name of a person cannot be accessed without further information of that person. However, Bredat et al. 2005 challenged this as they found conflicting evidence showing that the speed of names was recalled more rapidly than personal information when the person was a close friend. Bruce and Young's model is undeniably influential, as many of his predictions have received empirical support. The main strength of this model is that it produces quantifiable predictions that can be tested, and it proposes clear differences in the way familiar and unfamiliar faces are recognized. However, the model does come with its limitations, mainly because it is oversimplified. The model also has other weaknesses, such as the many assumptions it makes. One example can be that the name processing occurs after the processing of personal information, which has been proven wrong by more recent studies. Moreover, the details regarding familiar face processing are quite vague, and other parts of the model, such as the cognitive model system, are not clearly defined. Lastly, the model does not represent the processes of learning in its theory, which plays a big role in recognizing new faces and storing these images in memory. As discussed earlier, the human face is a unique and important stimuli. Within each face, there are many unique characteristics which shows information about a person's demographics, such as age, sex, and race, or emotional state, and even behaviors can be extracted with ease. Although humans have well-developed face processing expertise, it still remains subject to many biases. One of the well-known biases is the cross-race effect, which is the tendency to have more accurate recognition of the same race rather than cross-race faces. The cross-race effect is one of the most replicated biases that has been shown to be generalized throughout different researches and participant populations. Not only being a theoretically compelling bias, it also has many applied consequences. A good example of this is the fact that the criminal justice system still relies on eyewitness identification, despite it being proven that it's very common to have difficulties recalling faces of a different racial group, which ultimately can lead to false convictions. Thus, a number of theoretical perspectives have been proposed to further explain the cross-race effect. Most theories and research is focused on the developmental, perceptual, and representation differences in face processing. However, all of these theories come to one core assumption. A lack of contact with other race individuals results in lack of perceptual expertise with cross-race faces, which results in deficient cross-race face processing, encoding, and recognition. Nonetheless, this framework has received ambiguous support and only covers a small sector of the variance in face recognition. In recent years, there has been elevated interest in the social, cognitive, and motivational factors that influence face processing. Therefore, from a social cognitive perspective, biases in face recognition, such as the cross-race effect, are not solely the result of perceptual learning deficits, but would also be another result of that differential processing of inner and outer groups. In response to the criticism attributed to the previous theoretical framework, the social cognitive nature of the cross-racial effect has arisen, drawing from a vast literature documenting both the differential use of categories, Levin 1996, and differential motives elicited by in-group and out-group individuals. However, despite the significant strengths of the social cognitive models, they are regarded as being too incapable of explaining the large variety of phenomena in the cross-race effect literature. Consequently, recent advances indicates that both expertise and motivation mechanisms can work together to reduce the cross-race effect. This can be achieved by the incorporation of the two, treating each other not as competing perspectives but as complementary perspectives, but it is identified that more research is needed in this area. In conclusion, it was discovered that even though people have well-developed face processing expertise, it can be susceptible to biases, that the brain has specialized regions responsible for the perception and recognition of faces, and that ultimately its development doesn't take longer than 5 years to flourish. Furthermore, the well-known model proposed by Bruce and Young 1986 has been reviewed, identifying its strengths and weaknesses. Thank you very much.